This video workshop is for instructors who are interested in using the checklist tool in D2L as the primary means of student communication in their courses, or who have a D2L course where a checklist-based template has already been added. I'm calling this a video workshop rather than a tutorial because I'm going to be covering a lot of different aspects of the checklist tool, and it will definitely be longer than I would do with a normal one-topic tutorial video. So because of that, I will try to put links in the video description on YouTube to specific timestamps. So if there's a specific checklist related task you're wanting to see, definitely check out those links. Otherwise, if you're just wanting a good general overview, keep watching and stick it through the end, and you're going to learn a lot about checklists. So in this video, I'm going to cover the following. Number one, what is the checklist tool and how does it work? Two, why I like using the checklist tool in D2L and why I'm choosing to use it right now as my primary means of delivering course content, not just as a checklist, but also as a content tool. Three, some quirks of the checklist tool you want to be aware of as you're using it. So 2 and 3 are kind of the pros and the cons. 4, how to set up and edit checklists. That's definitely the where to click sort of thing. 5, how to make those checklists easily accessible by students. That's actually probably the trickiest part of the whole process. And then number 6, how to easily see how far on each checklist your students have progressed. So without further ado, let's dive in and look at some checklists. So the first thing we need to talk about is just what the checklist tool is. I'm sure you are familiar with what a checklist is kind of in the wild, but in D2L, I want to make sure you know what they look like and show you how they function. So what you are looking at right now is a checklist in a course from the student perspective. This is what the students see. And as you can see, as I scroll through, it's pretty much what you'd expect. It is a list of tasks with checkboxes. Here are the checkboxes for students to complete. And if we dig in a little bit deeper, we can see we have some different categories here within the checklist. Like here's a unit objectives category, that's just some text. And then we have a part 1 category with a due date. And then there's things inside of each category. And then also within the different items on the checklist, we have due dates. And then we also have links that if I were to click on these, you'll notice they get underlined when I hover my mouse over them. They would take me actually to the tool in question. So the D2L checklist tool can really function as kind of an all-in-one sort of tool where students can see what they have due, when they have to have it done by, and they can also get linked directly to any particular items that you want them to get linked to within the course. Now that you've seen the checklist tool, you might already have some ideas for why or how you might want to use it and what your students might think of it. But I want to talk just for a minute about the pros that I see for the checklist tool and why I really like using it even as a content tool. So first of all, anytime I've used checklists, students really love it. They find it easy to follow and see what they need to do. You know, different students have different ways they like to learn and process content. And I have found that some students just absolutely love and need a checklist, and others are a little more indifferent. But in general, I have never had anybody complain about being given a checklist of tasks to do. I think it just really makes things clear, and students will either just find it neutral or really, really like it. Second of all, I like checklists because as a course builder, as someone designing a course, it gets me thinking about the actions my students are taking, as opposed to just the content they are reading or what I, as an instructor, might be doing throughout the course. So it really gets me thinking in a student-focused mindset, and it promotes active learning because I'm giving my students a series of tasks and I'm thinking about the actual verbs that they're doing, the reading, the writing, the finding, the creating, all of those things in Bloom's taxonomy. Using a checklist kind of forces you into that mindset. So that's another reason I really like it. I really like using it, as I've mentioned, as kind of an all-in-one place for content for a couple of reasons. First of all, I'm really liking having content exist in my D2L course in only one place so that it's easy to update or make changes. It can get really cumbersome if you're putting due dates and assignment directions and things in lots of different places in the course. I'm really trying to streamline the courses that I work on so that things only exist in as few places as possible. And because the checklist not only has the checklist functionality, but it can link to the calendar, it can link to various assignments. It's a good place to kind of have everything in one place where you can link out and only have to update it in one location. Another reason I really like it is because it's allowing me to bypass using the content tool as the primary place where students go. And the reason is right now, as I'm recording this video, we're going into spring of 2020, and at OCU, where I am a teacher, we're updating the content area to the new content experience. And personally, I don't really love it. So this is a way for me to kind of bypass that, to be honest. It's allowing me to have a little more control over how I'm doing the content of my course. So those are just a few of the pros and benefits that I have found from incorporating the content or the checklist tool as my primary means of content. I also should mention that there are definitely some quirks or some challenges with the checklist tool. First of all, the checklist tool is definitely not a tool that D2L is sort of actively updating and promoting and making enhancements to, like they are with quizzes or content or grades. So what that means is it's a little bit old school in how you have to build it. And it's a little bit more picky and unintuitive. You kind of have to go the long way around for a couple of things. Nothing that I have found is a deal breaker for using the tool, but it is something to be aware of that you want just a really easy creation experience. This might not be the tool for you. The other thing about that is it is not instantly available in the default template for your students. So if you go in and create a checklist, you also have to take an extra step of making that checklist available for your students. And I'm going to show you how to do that in this video. But again, if you're wanting something super quick and easy to build, it may not be your best option. Even though it's pretty easy, you do have to kind of do quite a few little nitpicky steps to make it work properly. So those are hopefully the pros and the cons for the checklist tool. So now it is time for us to go in and actually build or edit our checklist. I've switched over to the instructor view in my course, and we're going to build a checklist together. I mentioned in the previous section that building checklists and working with them is not always the most intuitive, and that is evidenced by the fact that there's not an easy way to get to them from the nav bar. As the instructor, you actually have to go to the Edit Course menu. So we're going to start there and click on Edit Course. And then one of the options in my Edit Course menu is Checklist. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Now here you can see I have some checklists already built. The first time you look at this, of course, this area is going to be pretty blank, and you'll go ahead and click on New Checklist. This screen here is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to call this Practice Checklist, so that I know to delete it later. And then whatever you put for the description, you don't want to make it a super long description, but this will show up both on the list of checklists. And if you link this checklist in content, what you type here will show up right next to the title. So I'm just going to write that here. I'm going to say what you type in the checklist description will show up next to the checklist title. Be brief, exclamation mark. Okay. And then there's one other thing on this first screen, and it says open this checklist in a new window when viewed. I would recommend checking on that checkbox. You may decide to go back and uncheck it if you don't like the functionality, but I always check that box. So that is the first step, very straightforward. I'm going to click Save. Now here's where it gets a little bit fun, because now we have to create the categories and the items within our checklist. So the categories, like we saw at the beginning when we looked at the checklist, they're just groups of checklist items. I also use a category as a place if I just want to put in some directions for the students, like unit objectives or something like that. That's what I would create with a category. And then the items are anything that's going to have an actual box. So categories, groups, or text. Items are the actual check boxes. So we're going to start with creating a new category. And the first thing I'll show you how to do is just create a category if you want to type some text. So I'm going to just call this a text only category, just so you can see it at the end. Just can't spell. And this description area, this is where if you have, a video you want to add or links or content, it's not something that you need the students to actually check off, but you want to include maybe unit objectives, assorted random content that doesn't need a checkbox. Also, if I was using this not just as a text only category, but if I was creating a category where my checkboxes were going to live, I could put descriptions there. So let's hit save and new on this text only category. And then let's create one more. And I'm going to say this is task group number 1. If I was doing this for a course, I might have a checklist for, let's say, my unit 1, all my unit 1 tasks. Maybe unit 1 has 2 different due dates. And so I might have one category for a single due date. I might have another category for the second due date. I also might want to divide it, rather than dividing it by due dates, I might want to divide it by type. So all the readings might be a category. All of the things that have to be turned in might be a category. You can divide up your checklist in any way you want. And that probably is something you want to think about before you actually create them, is how do you want to divide your course tasks, both into checklists and then into categories within those checklists. There's not really a wrong way to do it, as long as it's something that makes sense for your course and is going to make sense for your students. So if this was going to create a group of tasks, back to this category at hand, this task group number 1, I might just type something about these tasks are all your course readings due on XXX and have the date there. So then when I finish the categories, I click save. And now I can see I have a couple of categories, and it's tempting to think that I'm done with my checklist. But if I preview this and look at it from the student view, you're going to see there's actually nothing for the students to check at this point. Right now it says what you type in the checklist description will show up here. There's my text only category, and there's my task group 1. But right now there are no checkboxes. So if we want to have checkboxes, which is kind of the point of the checklist, we can't stop with categories. We also have to have items. So now I'm going to go in and click new item. And the important part about new items, and this is something that I always forget to do, is make sure you assign them to the proper task. So it's going to default to the very first one on your list. But if you want it to be, for example, I don't want this item to be in the text only category, I want it to be in task group number 1, I have to go in and change that. And then here with the name, this is where you put kind of the headline for the activity that you want the students to do. So I might put something like read, and then a colon, and then chapters 1 through 4, or something like that. In the description is a great place to put links. So it might be something like, let's say this was a discussion board. I might include link to discussion board. I would include a description here. Description of assignment. And then I might have a link to whatever I needed to link. And the quick links in the checklist descriptions work just like quick links anywhere else, but let me just show you really quickly how you do this. You highlight whatever text you want to be the link. You click on this third button, and then you can see all of the things in the course that you can link to from within the checklist. So let's say I want to link to a Dropbox assignment. I'll just click on assignments, and then I can pick any of those to have it be a link to. And I know what I've typed here doesn't really make sense and it doesn't really match, but I just want to show you the functionality. So now I have my headline, I have a description, I have a link inside of here. And then due dates are also really important in the checklist tool. I think they really add to the functionality, but I'm going to save this and go back and show you how to do all of your due dates at once at the end. So I could check the due dates and check display and calendar now, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go back and show you how to go back and do everything at once there. So when I have this done, I'm going to click save. And now if I preview this, remember I've added categories, but there were no checkboxes. Now, when I scroll down into that task group number 1, I now have a beautiful little checkbox that my students can click on. That is how to create a checklist in a nutshell. To go back and edit the checklist, let me go ahead and save and close this. To go back and edit the checklist, I again click on edit course, I click on checklists, it takes me to this screen. And then if I just click on the word practice checklists, it's going to take me to the same screen where I created it, and I can go back in and edit any of these items that I want. So if I want to edit what appears here, I just click on that and I can go back in and check things. A couple of things to point out. I mentioned that this tool can be a little bit quirky. You want to hit the save button anytime you make any changes, because this is a tool where if you don't click the save button every time you change something, your changes might not stick. So that is one of those little quirks that you want to be aware of. Anytime you change something like up here, or anytime you change any descriptions, just always click save whenever you're done. That is a very important thing to do. The other thing I want to just encourage you to do is get in the habit of opening a preview window. And anytime you make a change or look at something, just go check it in the preview box to make sure that things appear where you want. On this list, if I close this out, for example, you'll see this text only category. It doesn't tell me what it says in there. There's nothing like to show me what it says. So if I click go back to preview, that's going to show it from the student view, and that's going to be really the best way for you to see what you have within your checklist. So this, in a nutshell, like I said, has showed you how to create a checklist. It showed you how to add items. It showed you how to add categories. I want to show you one more thing, which is I mentioned that you can go back in and add in due dates. And this is a really cool feature. So I'm going to click here. I'm here looking at my checklist that I've been working on. I click this box so that all these little check boxes are highlighted, and then I'm going to click edit. And this takes me to a bulk edit screen. And this is similar to that bulk edit tool that exists in the gradebook. If you haven't used it there, it's really helpful in the gradebook as well. But from here, from a single screen, I would be able to see all of the things that I had in the checklist. I would be able to swap categories. So remember how I said it's really easy to let things sort of get into the wrong category? This would allow you to categorize all of your items from a single screen. And then it's also very easy from a single screen to set due dates and whether or not things go into the calendar from a single screen. So if any of these tasks are tasks that you have a specific due date for, you're going to want to check that due date box. Then you're going to want to add a date and a time that these things are due. Let's just leave it at the default right now. And then this box here, this calendar event, if this is something you want to appear in the calendar of your course, you would go ahead and check this box. I'm not going to go ahead and check it right now because this is just a practice one, but when we're all done, you'll see where those calendar events show up. It's kind of up to you within your course whether you want to check due dates and what things you want to appear in the calendar. I tend, as an instructor, to make calendar events for things that I'm going to be grading and then put due dates on anything else that isn't going to be graded, but then I don't check the calendar event for. So that was kind of confusing, but basically, if it's something that has to be done at a specific time, check the due date. If it's something I want students to get like notifications about, then I also make it an event because that just adds another layer of D2L functionality kind of enforcing when those things happen. So all that is to say, I've edited these multiple items. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. If I would have made that a calendar item, you would see a little bell that shows up down there. The other thing I want to point out here is this reorder button. So we've created a new category, we've created a new item, we've edited things. Reordering can be really helpful because as you create these, they just kind of file in one after the other, and it's not like the content area where you can drag things around. So if you want to reorganize things when you're done or at any point, you can go to this screen and I can flip these around. So if I wanted to make that task group number 1 the very first thing, I could just flip those. It's kind of like the reordering functionality that appears a lot of other places in D2L as well. So I'm going to hit save. And then the last thing I want to show you is if you want to delete an item in here. Again, D2L makes deleting things kind of tricky, but you have this little delete box. If I click on it, it's going to say pick one item. And so let's say I wanted to delete this category. I could then click delete. It's going to say, are you sure? And I'm going to say no, but if that is how you would go ahead and delete something. So at this point, we have gone to the checklist tool. We've created a checklist. We've created categories. We've created items, and we've looked at a bunch of different ways to edit them. Now that I'm all done, I'm going to click save and close. Okay, now that we have created and learned how to edit a checklist, we have to make that checklist available for our students. Remember how to get to the checklist tool as an instructor, we had to definitely go the back way, clicking on edit course and then getting in that way. Well, students don't have the ability to get to edit course. So if we want them to be able to get to our checklists, we have to make them available. So there's probably 3 different ways that you can do that. The first way, I'll show you probably the easiest one first, and that's to simply add a checklist within content. So I'm going to go ahead and click on content in my course. I've created a little practice module here for just the purposes of this video, and I'm going to go to add existing activities, and then I'm going to select checklist. And then here is all the checklists I've created in this course. I'll click on the one we did in this video, which is practice checklist. And now my students are going to have access to that checklist. Now I want to give you a caveat here as an instructor. When you click on practice checklist in the content area, it's going to look a little goofy. You do have the ability to edit things here in this checklist and add new lists and add new content. I would not recommend making very many edits here within the content tool, unless it's just like a quick typo fix or something, because you do have a lot more functionality and things within the checklist area rather than doing it within content. This is one of those examples where, because the content tool doesn't get updated all the time, the interface is just a little bit wonky. So I would definitely recommend, as an instructor, making sure to do all your edits through the edit course menu rather than doing them here in content. Even though I could, like if I wanted to change a word here, I simply click, I can write the word edited, I can click update. And so it is very easy to make like quick edits on the fly, but if you want to do any like reordering or kind of big edits, I would definitely recommend going to the edit course tool. The other thing to point out is it's going to look different for your students. They obviously don't have the ability to edit. So in that case, you're going to want to do view as student a lot. And now you can see, if I click on this, this is what things are going to look like for my students. So that is the easiest way to add a checklist for your students. I want to point out one thing. If you use the hack of putting a description in for a category, notice my category descriptions don't show up here in content. So if you are using the checklist tool as a way to share content, this may not be the best way for you to share it, or a good primary way for you to share it, because students won't see that content there. So just a caveat, one of those quirks that we have to deal with. Notice that there's no description that shows up if you're primarily adding things to content, but it is the easiest way to do it. The second way that you can add a checklist is simply by adding it as a link in any place you would type text. So let's say I am using the announcements tool as a place to do that. I'm going to go ahead and hit go to the, notice this is a good point to point out. I don't have the option to add a new announcement, and it's because I'm still viewing as a student. So I'm going to close out of that. And now I'm going to have the option to create a new announcement. So I'll just show you how I would add a checklist link there. So I'm just going to type checklist link here in the content, and then I'm going to put this is a link to your checklist. And then again, it's just a quick link like I put in the checklist tool itself. I click on that links button, and then one of the things I can link to is a checklist. I can go to my practice checklist, and if I publish this and I go back to course home, now I have a little checklist link. If I switch to view as student and I click on it here, this is going to take me to my checklist, and you'll notice here my category descriptions show up. So that is kind of a pro or a plus for linking either in announcements or in this third way I'm going to show you, which is adding a checklist widget. And it's probably the most complicated, but I think it's the best for students. So we'll show you that in the next segment. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to show you in this video is probably my favorite way to share checklists with students, because it's just the easiest and puts them right up front on the homepage of the course, and that's to create a custom checklist or quick links widget. Now D2L, if you've ever gone into D2L homepages and started messing around with that, you know they do have a lot of different custom widgets, but they do not have a checklist one. So if we want widgets to show up somewhere on the homepage of our course, and I should also mention that I've switched to a different course for the purposes of this section, if I want those quick links to the checklist to show up in my course, I have to create a widget for it. So the two things I have to do to make this work is number one, I have to create a links widget. And then number two, I have to create a copy of this homepage and add the widget to that. So it sounds complicated and it does take a lot of clicks, but it is pretty straightforward. So let's dive in. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Edit Course, just like where I went to create the checklists. And then I'm going to look for the home pages area. So here is home pages. Let's click on that. And then when you get to this home pages area, there's two links up here at the top, and one says home pages and one says widgets. And we're going to start on the widgets area. So I'm going to go ahead and click on widgets. Now, looking through this, you can see all the widgets that have sort of been created so far in this course. If I click on system widgets, that's going to show me all the ones that D2L has sort of created by default. And if you've never looked through this and you're interested in customizing your course homepage, it's definitely worth a little bit of time to take a look. But for the purposes of adding checklists to our homepage, we're going to stick here on this custom widgets tab, and I'm going to say create widget. Now, my favorite way or place to put a quick links widget is right at the top, kind of as a sub banner. So for the title of my widget, I'm going to call it Quick Links Banner. And then the description is not anything that will show up on the homepage, but you might want it as a reference for you later. So you might put something like created by and your initials on, and then the date, anything that's going to help you remember what this is later on, or that's going to help somebody else who's using like a copy of your course later on to know what's going on. Now, one of the tricky things about widgets is it's going to be very tempting to put your content right here in this box, but you'll notice that we have a content tab over here. So I'm going to click on that. And now here is where I'm going to go ahead and build my quick links widget. Now, when I'm building this, it helps to have kind of an idea of where you're going to put it on the page of your course. What I'll show you is going to be a widget that is stretched out kind of wide and horizontal. But if you decide you want to put it somewhere else so it's a little bit more vertical, obviously you might organize what you put here in this widget editor a little bit differently. For the purposes of this, I'm going to type quick links, and then I'm going to type checklist 1, checklist 2, and I'm just going to type etc. You might also put a link to like a syllabus or a start here page. You can customize this in any way you want. The key part of it is that you have some text that you can highlight and then go to the links button and then go to your checklist and click on the checklist. And let's do it again. Checklist 2, let's go pick a different checklist. Here, there's a checklist 2. Perfect. And then I'm going to do just a smidgen of formatting, and then I'm going to make this aligned center and add another little space, and maybe I'll make the quick links word bold just to make it a little bit fancy. And then I'm going to hit save and close. Now, when I scroll down my widget list, I have a quick links banner option. So that's the first thing. I had to create my widget. Now I'm going to go to the home pages. And depending on how much your course has messed with home pages, this list might look a little bit different. It might look a little bit longer. But what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make a copy of the default course homepage. So you see here I have this active default homepage icon. That's the one that I'm looking at sort of when courses come out of the box. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this little drop down and I'm going to hit copy. And now notice this is blue and I can click on it and I can edit it. So I'm going to go into this copy of the default template, and here is where I'm going to add my widget. So again, the description is just for your reference only. Okay. And then there's a couple things you can tweak right away. So in this particular layout, the default layout is one that I'm going to keep, and it's the large right panel. You can see here kind of where the widgets could go, and I could put my quick links widget in any of these places, but I'm going to put it in this top area right here. I'll also add it to a smaller area just so you can see what it'll look like in a couple different places. How I go about adding that is pretty self-explanatory because there's a button here that says add widgets. So I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to go look for my quick links banner. And this is where having that description can be super helpful because it can tell you, oh yeah, this is the one I need to add. And I'm going to click add. And then there's one other thing I'm going to do because I don't want to see the title of that. I want it to be as clean as possible. So I'm going to hit uncheck display a title. And that way I'm only just going to see a plain white box without a title in it. You could, if you wanted, leave the title and call the title quick links. There's tons of ways you can customize this, but this is how I do it. And then when I get done with that, I'm going to hit save. And then you can see I have my little quick links banner here. I'm going to add it one more place just so that we can see what it looks like in a couple different spots. So let me go ahead and add widgets on this left-hand area as well. You definitely would only need to put it one place in your course, but I just want to show you for the purposes of this video. And then I'm going to drag it up here to the top. Perfect. And then I'm going to say save and close because I'm done editing the page, but there's one more thing I have to do, and that's that I have to select it here from the menu. Now this can get a little bit confusing. One thing that will help is I went back and clicked on that homepage because when you're editing it, if you can give it a name that's a little more specific, that's going to help. So I'm going to say homepage with quick link banner, and then save and close. Now, from the active homepage area, I'm going to select homepage with quick link banner. I'm going to click apply. Those are all very important steps and it's easy to forget. And then I'm going to go back to course home. And now you can see my little quick links have been added in two different places. So here you can see the one that I added that goes horizontally across the top. And all of these are going to take me directly to those checklists when I click on them. And then here's the one here. Now notice I didn't hide the title on this particular one, so you can see what it looks like when the title's there. I think I do have the option to edit it after the fact if I want to. And you can see the formatting here looks a little bit different, but that gives you an idea of how to add those. You can link anything you want in one of these widgets. That's something that's kind of cool to do. But the awesome thing is when your students check on it, it's going to take them right to that checklist. And if I go back to home, I just did it in the instructor view, which as we mentioned earlier is a little bit goofy. But if I switch to student view and then click on a checklist, there is my very simple checklist number 2 that I happen to have in this course. So I'm going to cancel out of that. And that is the way that I recommend adding checklists if you're going to use them, especially for kind of the main pieces of content in your course. This is the way that I do it. Hopefully this answered all the questions that you have and then some about using checklists in your course and using them kind of as a primary function in your course design. We talked about the pros and cons of using checklists. We talked about how to set them up. We talked about how to edit them. And then the last step, which is probably the most important, is sharing them with students and making sure students have access to them. The very last thing I need to show you with regards to checklists is how you as the instructor can see how your students have progressed on the items that you've set up in the checklist. Let's pretend we're a few weeks into the semester. Your course has all these great checklists in it, and you want to see at a glance what students have completed what. And this is really one of the things also that's really cool about checklists. So in order to do this and in order to look at it, I'm going to go again to the Edit Course menu. And rather than going to checklists or home pages, or we've been earlier in this video, I'm going to go to the area that says Class Progress. This is another one of those areas that if you've never checked it out, you're going to find a lot of really cool information here that you can all see at a glance. Now, right now in this particular course, I only have one student. You can see he's only done a little bit of the course, and there's nothing here that shows anything about checklists, but we're going to fix that. And we're going to show some checklist completions at a glance. So I'm going to go here in Class Progress to Settings. And then I'm going to take whichever one of these completion summaries I'm least interested in. And probably for most people, it's going to be this objectives one to start off with. And I'm going to click on that box and I'm going to say replace. And I'm going to replace this with the checklist completion summary. There it is. So the checklist completion summary is an indicator displaying how the learner is progressing through the assigned course checklists. Highlighted items indicate items that are due within the next 7 days, because remember, we can attach due dates to all of our checklist items, and that's a really cool way to keep students accountable. Other things you could add to this completion summary, like let's say you weren't using content, but you're using a lot of quizzes. I can go ahead and change this to be a quiz performance summary. You can make the things here in this class progress area anything you want, but for right now we're going to focus on this checklist completion summary. So let's hit save and close. And I can see now at a glance that Stuart, my test student in this course, has completed 9 out of the 16 things that are available on his checklist. And if I click on that particular area, this takes me to a little bit more kind of zoomed in view for Stuart, and I can see how far he is on each particular checklist that is in this course. So this is a really handy way if I want to see both the class as a whole, because if I had more students in this course, there would be a whole list of students here and all of their checklist completion would appear here, and I could sort of see this bar move in real time. Or if I want to see specifically how one student is doing with all of the checklists, I can click on it and here is the student's particular progress with that checklist. So yet another benefit of the checklist tool is at a glance viewing on how your students are progressing. And that about wraps it up on our checklist video workshop. As a refresher, we talked about what the checklist tool in D2L is, the pros and cons of using it, how to create a checklist, what I think is the tricky part, which is sharing that checklist with students and all the different ways you can do that. And then we wrapped up by showing you how, at a glance, you can see how your students are doing on the checklist items that you have for them in your course. If you have any specific questions that I have not answered, please feel free to comment below this video on YouTube and I will try to answer as many of them as I can. I wish you the best of luck with your courses and using the checklist tool in D2L.